Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling something that's super important for anyone looking to, fund education.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is a big one. We're talking about RESPs, Registered Education Savings Plans. We're going to break down exactly,
All the ins and outs.
yeah, all the ins and
Really
outs.
make sure people understand how they work and why they matter.
Exactly. And to do that, we've got a whole stack of info from the CRA.
Perfect.
So let's jump right into it. What exactly is an RESP?
Well, an RESP is essentially a contract where you, the subscriber, contribute to a plan for a future student, and we call them the beneficiary.
Okay. And anyone can be a subscriber, right? It doesn't have to be a parent.
Absolutely not. It could be grandparents, aunts, uncles, a family friend. Anyone who wants to support a child's future education can open an RESP for them.
Okay, so it's very flexible. So what makes these RESPs so special? What are the advantages?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is that the investments within an RESP grow tax sheltered.
Oh, that's nice. So you're not, like, losing money to taxes every year.
Exactly. That means more money ultimately goes towards education.
So it's almost like a financial greenhouse for your savings.
I love that. A financial greenhouse, protecting your money and helping it grow faster.
Okay. So now that we know what an RESP is, let's talk about the different types.
Sure, there are two main types of RESPs, family plans and specified plans.
All right, so break those down for us. What's the difference?
A family plan is designed for multiple beneficiaries. So if you have several children or grandchildren, you can have them all under one plan.
Oh, that's convenient.
It is. A specified plan, on the other hand, is for a single beneficiary.
Okay, that makes sense. So you choose the plan based on how many kids you're saving for.
Exactly.
Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How much can we actually put into these RESPs?
Well, there's no annual limit on contributions. However, there is a lifetime limit of $50,000 per beneficiary.
Okay, so there's a cap. What happens if, I don't know, someone gets a little carried away and contributes more than that $50,000 limit?
Well, there's a penalty for that.
Yeah.
The CRA will charge a 1% penalty every month on any excess contributions.
Oh, so it's not like a slap on the wrist. There are real consequences.
Yes, it's definitely something to be mindful of.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Now let's move on to the fun part, the free money. Tell us about the Canada Education Savings Grant, or CESG.
This is where things get really exciting. The government will actually match a portion of your contributions.
Seriously, they just give you extra money.
They do. For every dollar you contribute, up to $2,500 annually, the government adds another 20 cents, so that's an extra $500 per year.
Wow, that's amazing. But wait, there's more, right? I've heard there's a way to get even more free money.
You're right. Depending on your family income, you may qualify for even more grant money through what's called the additional CESG. They've got this chart that shows how much extra you could receive based on your income level. It's pretty neat.
So you're saying if you start saving early and contribute regularly, you can really maximize those grant amounts. It's like a snowball effect, right?
Exactly. Time is your best friend when it comes to RESPs, especially when those grants and compound growth are working their magic.
Now, what about families who maybe don't have as much to contribute? Are there any programs for them?
Absolutely. There's the Canada Learning Bond, or CLB. It's specifically designed for low-income families, and it doesn't require any contributions from the family themselves.
That's amazing. So even if you're not in a position to contribute a lot, there's still an opportunity to get some help with education savings.
Exactly. The CLB can provide up to $2,000 in benefits, which can make a huge difference.
Okay, so we've covered the basics, the types of plans, the contribution limits, and all those fantastic government grants. But what happens when it's actually time to use this money? How do the payments work?
There are two main types of payments you can receive from an RESP. We call them educational assistance payments, or EAPs, and accumulated income payments, or AIPs.
Okay, two different types. Let's start with the EAPs. What are those all about?
EAPs are specifically for post-secondary education expenses, things like tuition, textbooks, maybe even living expenses.
So when your kid gets that acceptance letter to college or university, those EAPs are ready to help cover the costs.
Exactly. They can be used for a variety of educational programs, universities, colleges, trade schools, apprenticeships. As long as it helps the beneficiary further their education, EAPs can be used.
Okay, that's pretty flexible. Are there any limits on how much you can receive in EAPs?
There's an initial limit of $8,000 for the first 13 weeks of study, but after that, as long as the student remains eligible, There's no cap on how much they can receive in EAPs.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, what about the other type of payment? You call them AIPs, right? When did those come into play?
AIPs are paid out if the beneficiary decides not to pursue post-secondary education. In this case, the funds go back to the subscriber, but they are subject to tax.
Oh, so there are tax implications if you decide not to use the money for education?
Yes, you'll have to pay regular income tax on those AIPs, plus an additional 20% tax.
Wow, that's a significant chunk. Are there any ways to reduce that tax hit?
You can potentially transfer a portion of those AIPs to your RRSP, which could help lower your overall tax burden.
So it's worth exploring different strategies to minimize the tax implications if you end up receiving AIPs.
Absolutely. It's all about planning ahead and considering different scenarios.
Okay, makes sense. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the basics of RESPs to contributions, grants, and payments. But I'm curious, what are some of the specific rules or scenarios that people should be aware of? Like, what if you need to change the beneficiary on a plan? Can you do that?
You can, but there are some things to consider. For instance, if the new beneficiary already has an RDSP, combining the contributions could lead to exceeding that lifetime limit.
Ah, so you could accidentally trigger those penalties if you're not careful.
Exactly. It's not as simple as just switching names. You're essentially merging contribution histories.
I see. So it's important to be mindful of those contribution limits when changing beneficiaries. What about transferring our ESP property to a different RESP? Is that allowed?
Yes, you can definitely do that. And in most cases, there are no tax implications, especially if the beneficiary remains the same. This can be helpful if you're switching providers or maybe trying to consolidate plans for easier management.
Okay, so transferring can be a good option for streamlining your RESPs, but are there any situations where transferring could cause problems?
It can get a bit tricky if you're dealing with different beneficiaries and the new beneficiary already has an existing RESP. Again, you run the risk of exceeding that lifetime contribution limit if you're not careful.
Right, it's all about being aware of those limits and making sure everything adds up correctly. Now, this next one is interesting. The CRA guide mentions that you can sometimes roll over RESP funds into an RDSP, a registered disability savings plan. Why would someone do that?
Well, sometimes life throws you a curveball. If the beneficiary becomes ineligible for post-secondary education due to a disability, this rollover acts as a safety net.
So it's a way to support individuals with disabilities and ensure they still have access to financial resources.
Exactly. You can transfer the funds to an RDSP without facing those regular tax penalties, which is a huge relief in those situations.
That's a really compassionate aspect of the system. It acknowledges that things don't always go according to plan and provides options for different circumstances.
Absolutely. And to make sure the system is used fairly, the CRA has some rules in place to prevent misuse of RESPs. They're called anti-avoidance rules.
Oh, those sound important. What exactly are these anti-avoidance rules all about?
Well, they're basically safeguards to prevent folks from exploiting those tax benefits for personal gain. One example is the rules around prohibited investments.
Prohibited investments. So we're not talking about betting it all on black at the casino, right?
Uh-huh.
No, not quite. Prohibited investments are situations where the subscriber, the person who opened the RESP, benefits personally from the investments within the plan. Ah, so it's about keeping things ethical and transparent. You can't use your child's RESP to, like, buy a new car or invest in your own business.
Exactly. And the CRA takes this very seriously. There are some hefty penalties involved if you try to bend the rules.
Yikes. It sounds like the CRA means business. But what if those prohibited investments were accidental? Is there any way to fix the situation?
You might be able to get a refund, but only under certain conditions. You need to correct the mistake quickly, either dispose of the prohibited investment or make sure it no longer falls under that category. And you have to do it all within a year of the tax arising.
So there's a window of opportunity to fix things, but it's definitely better to be aware of the rules from the start.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the world of RESPs.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of information here, from the basics of what an RESP is, to the different types of plans, those contribution limits, the amazing government grants, the different payment options, and even those all-important anti-avoidance rules. Whew.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But this is crucial information for anyone looking to, make the most of their education savings. But before we totally overload you, let's switch gears for a bit and talk about some specific investment strategies that can really help make your RESP grow.
That sounds like a great idea.
We'll be right back after a quick break to explore those exciting possibilities. Stay tuned.
All right, so let's talk about making those RESP savings work even harder for you. The CRA guide mentions a few common investment options, but I think it's worth looking beyond those and exploring alternative strategies that could potentially, boost your returns.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So when I think of investing, I usually think about things like stocks and bonds. Are those good options for RESPs?
Oh, they can be, yeah. Stocks, especially when held for the long term, have the potential for higher growth, but of course come with more risk. Bonds, on the other hand, are generally safer, but may not grow as fast.
So it's all about finding that balance between risk and reward.
Exactly. And one way to strike that balance is through diversification.
Diversification. Okay, I've heard that term before, but remind me what it means in the context of investing.
Basically, it means spreading your investments across different types of assets, like stocks, bonds, and real estate.
Hmm.
So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. If one investment isn't performing well, others might be doing better.
Okay, that makes sense. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But how do you actually diversify within an RESP?
Well, one really simple and effective way is through mutual funds or exchange-traded funds, also known as ETFs.
Okay, mutual funds and ETFs. Tell me more about those. How do they work?
They basically pool money from multiple investors and use that money to buy a diversified portfolio of assets.
So it's like having a team of experts managing your investments for you.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. They do all the research, the selection, and the ongoing management of the investments. It can be a really convenient option for a lot of people.
Yeah, especially if you're not a financial expert yourself. So that's mutual funds and ETFs. Any other investment strategies that are suitable for RESPs?
Well, another one that comes to mind is target date funds.
Okay, target date funds. What are those?
So with target date funds, they're designed to adjust their asset allocation as the beneficiary gets closer to needing the money for education.
Oh, interesting. So as the child gets closer to college age, the fund automatically becomes more conservative.
Exactly. It takes some of the guesswork out of managing your investments. You don't have to constantly rebalance your portfolio as the years go by.
That's pretty cool. It
Yeah,
sounds like there's a whole range of options for investing within an RESP.
there is. We've talked about diversification, mutual funds, ETFs, and target date funds. And there are other more specialized approaches too, like investing in individual stocks or bonds.
But those probably require a bit more, research and knowledge of the markets.
They do, yeah. It's important to choose a strategy that aligns with your risk tolerance and your financial goals.
Right. Don't just jump into something without understanding the risks involved.
Exactly. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, a qualified financial advisor can always provide personalized guidance. They can help you create a plan that's right for your specific situation.
Okay, so lots of options to consider. But let's get back to the CRA guide for a moment. We were talking about those anti-avoidance rules earlier, and they seem pretty important.
They are very important. As we've mentioned, they're there to ensure that RESPs are used fairly and for their intended purpose, education.
Right. And one of the key aspects of those rules is the concept of prohibited investments.
Right, exactly. And in addition to those prohibited investments, the CRE also has rules about what they call non-qualified investments.
Okay, so we talked about prohibited investments before. Those are the ones where the subscriber, benefits personally. What are these non-qualified investments?
They're basically any investments that the CRA doesn't consider suitable for an RESP. The rules are pretty similar to those for RESPs. It's all about sticking to investments that are generally considered safe and appropriate for long-term growth. Things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, GICs, those are all usually fine.
So you're saying no investing in, like, your friend's startup company or that hot new cryptocurrency.
Probably not the best idea. Those would likely fall under non-qualified investments. And just like with prohibited investments, there are penalties if you hold non-qualified investments in your RESP.
Okay, so what happens if you, accidentally slip up and end up with a non-qualified investment in your RESP? What are the consequences?
Well, there's a penalty of a 50% tax on the fair market value of that non-qualified investment. And on top of that, there's also a 100% advantage tax on any income earned or any capital gains you might have realized from those investments.
Whoa, those are some serious penalties. You definitely don't want to mess around with those.
No, you don't. And remember those advantages we talked about earlier, where someone tries to use the RESP for their own personal benefit, like taking out loans or using it for unrelated investments. Well, that 100% advantage tax applies in those situations too.
Oh, right. The CRA is really cracking down on anyone trying to abuse the system.
They are. It's important to remember that RESPs are designed specifically for educational purposes. That's what they're for.
Okay, so it's clear that the CRA has all these anti-avoidance rules in place to keep things fair and make sure everyone's using RESPs for their intended purpose.
Absolutely. But I get it, all these rules and regulations can be a bit much to keep track of. That's why having a knowledgeable financial advisor on your side can be so valuable.
Right. They can help you navigate all the complexities and make sure you're making the best decisions for your situation. But before you rush off to find an advisor, we've got a few more key takeaways to share about RESPs. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into RESPs.
Yes, we are.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's amazing how much there is to know about these things.
It is. It is so much more than I thought.
Right.
So before we go, let's just recap, like, what are the big takeaways here? What do people really need to remember?
Okay, so big picture RESPs are a fantastic way to make education more affordable.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, the tax-sheltered growth alone is huge.
Yeah.
But then you add those government grants on top of that. It's like, it's amazing.
It's like free money from the government.
Exactly. Free money to help pay for education. It's a no-brainer.
Definitely. But I guess it's not all like sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
There are some rules, right?
Yeah, there are some rules. Like we talked about the contribution limits.
Yeah, the penalty.
Right, the penalties if you go over those limits.
Yeah.
And all that stuff about prohibited investments.
Yeah. You got to be careful with that.
Right, you do. It's not a free-for-all.
Yeah, it's not just like put any money in there and you're good to go. You
Yeah.
got to follow the rules.
Exactly. But if you do, it's like a really amazing tool. And remember how we talked about those alternative investment strategies?
Yeah, like going beyond just the basic stocks and bonds.
Right, right. Things like diversification or using mutual funds or ETFs or even those, what were they called?
Target date funds.
Target date funds. Those are great options too.
Yeah, yeah. So many choices.
There are. It's really about doing your research and picking the strategy that makes sense for you.
Yeah, and if you're not sure, talk to a financial advisor.
Always a good idea.
Okay, so I think a big takeaway from all of this is, knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
Like the more you know about RESPs, the better decisions you can make.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Got to be informed.
So I guess final thought, we've covered a lot here, but what about people who, maybe they're just starting to think about education savings now, maybe their kids are a little older. Is it like too late for them?
It's never too late to start saving. Never. Even small contributions can add up over time, especially with that compound growth.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, don't give up. It's always worth it to start saving.
Okay, good. So it's never too late to start. And I guess, if people want more information, they can always talk to a financial advisor.
Right? Yes, absolutely. Get some expert advice. Make sure you're on the right track.
Perfect. Well, I think that about covers it. Thanks for joining us on this RESP deep dive.
My pleasure.
Hopefully you learned something new. And remember, it's never too early or too late to start planning for education. So until next time, keep those minds curious and those learning adventures alive.